Mrs. Patterson, you're confused again. Nurse Chloe Brennan's voice carried that particular tone of condescending patience as she reached for my phone. I was sitting in my wheelchair in the day room of Riverside Senior Living, the facility where I'd been recovering from hip surgery for the past 6 weeks. Let me take this before you accidentally call someone. I held the phone against my chest, my fingers wrapped around it tightly. I'm not confused. I was just checking my emails. Of course you were, dear. Chloe smiled, but her eyes remained cold. Now hand it over. It's almost time for your medication anyway. What Chloe didn't know was that my phone had been recording for the past 20 minutes. What she really didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for 3 weeks, ever since I discovered what she and the facility administrator were doing to vulnerable residents like me. My name is Helen Patterson. I'm 78 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was a practicing attorney specializing in elder law. The hip replacement surgery had been routine, but my doctor recommended a rehabilitation facility rather than going straight home. My daughter Vanessa lived 2 states away with her own family. My son Christopher worked overseas. At 78 and living alone, temporary care made sense. Riverside Senior Living had excellent ratings and a reputation for quality rehabilitation services. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. Physical therapy, meals, medication, rest, standard recovery. Then I noticed irregularities, small things at first, medication doses that didn't match my chart, charges appearing on my statements for services never rendered, conversations I wasn't part of about updating my insurance information. I'd spent 40 years protecting elderly clients from financial exploitation. I recognized the warning signs immediately. So instead of confronting anyone, I started documenting every interaction, every medication administration, every suspicious conversation. My phone, set to record audio continuously, captured everything. Chloe thought I was a confused old woman. That was her first mistake. Mrs. Patterson, I need that phone now. Chloe's voice had an edge to it. We have rules about electronic devices during medication time. I'm allowed to have my phone, I replied calmly. I'm a voluntary resident, not a prisoner. Of course you are. She moved closer, her hand extended. But you keep making these confused calls to your daughter. You told her we were stealing from you yesterday, remember? That's not appropriate. I hadn't called Vanessa yesterday, but I had discovered something interesting while reviewing my financial statements. Someone had been systematically billing my insurance for procedures never performed, physical therapy sessions I never attended, consultations with specialists who never visited. The total over 6 weeks exceeded $45,000. I don't recall making that call, I said carefully. Chloe's smile widened. See, that's exactly what I mean. The confusion. Dr. Wesley thinks we should adjust your medications, maybe something to help with the memory issues. Dr. Wesley was the facility's medical director, a man I'd met exactly twice during my stay. Both times, he'd spent less than 5 minutes reviewing my chart before rushing off to other patients. I suspected his involvement in the billing fraud went deeper than negligence. I'll discuss my medications with my personal physician, I said, when she visits next week. That was a lie. My physician wasn't scheduled to visit, but I needed time, and I needed Chloe to think I was more compliant than observant. Of course, Chloe's voice had that practiced patience again. Now, about the phone. I'm expecting an important call from my son, I said. He's calling from Singapore in 10 minutes. I need to keep it. Chloe hesitated. Christopher actually was overseas, though he wasn't scheduled to call today. But Chloe didn't know that. Fine, but right after your call, I'm taking it for safekeeping. We can't have you making more confused calls and upsetting your family. After Chloe left, I stopped the recording and saved it with the date and timestamp. 3 weeks of documentation, hours of audio files, conversations between staff members they thought no one was hearing, medication administration procedures that violated every protocol I knew, and most importantly, discussions between Chloe and the facility administrator, Warren Mitchell, about which residents were good candidates for increased billing. I wasn't their only victim. I'd identified at least 6 other residents whose families were probably being defrauded. Elderly people with cognitive issues who couldn't advocate for themselves. People whose families trusted Riverside to provide honest care. Warren and Chloe had developed a systematic scheme. They targeted residents with good insurance coverage and limited family oversight. They billed for services never provided. They adjusted medications to keep residents compliant and confused. They intercepted mail and phone calls to prevent families from discovering the fraud. What they hadn't anticipated was a resident with 40 years of legal experience in exactly this type of exploitation. That evening, I called my former law partner, Stuart Hayes. Stuart had taken over my practice when I retired 2 years ago, but we remained close friends. "Helen, it's good to hear from you," he said warmly. "How's the recovery going?" "Complicated," I replied, keeping my voice low. My roommate was sleeping, but I couldn't risk being overheard. "I need your help with something sensitive." I explained what I'd discovered, keeping the details brief but comprehensive. Stuart's background in healthcare fraud made him the perfect ally. "How certain are you about this?" he asked. "I have documentation, recordings, financial statements, medical records that don't match the billed services. Stuart, this is exactly what we used to prosecute. They're running a classic exploitation scheme." "Have they threatened you?" "Not directly, but the nurse, Chloe Brennan, is pushing to confiscate my phone and adjust my medications. She claims I'm confused and making inappropriate calls to my family. I think they're planning to isolate me further before I can expose them." Stuart was quiet for a moment. "We need to involve authorities immediately. This isn't something you should handle alone, especially while you're recovering in their facility. I know, but I need my evidence protected first. If they take my phone, I lose everything. The recordings are backed up to cloud storage, but I need the originals secure." "I'll contact the state's elder abuse hotline first thing tomorrow," Stuart said. "And I'm calling a friend at the FBI. Healthcare fraud on this scale crosses federal lines. But Helen, you need to be careful. If they suspect you're onto them, things could get dangerous." "I've been careful. They think I'm a confused old woman. That's been my advantage." That advantage disappears the moment they realize you're not confused. "Can you get out of there? Check yourself out?" I looked around my small room. Not easily. I'm still recovering from surgery. I can't drive, can't navigate stairs easily. And if I leave suddenly, I'll alert them that something's wrong. They'll destroy evidence before anyone can investigate. The next morning, Chloe arrived during breakfast with a new strategy. "Mrs. Patterson, Dr. Wesley would like to see you this morning. He's concerned about your recent behavior." "What behavior?" I kept my tone mild, unthreatening. "The confused calls to your family, the agitation about your medications. He thinks we should run some cognitive tests." Cognitive tests. A convenient way to establish documentation that I was mentally impaired. Once they had that on record, anything I said about fraud could be dismissed as confusion. "I feel fine," I replied, "but I'm happy to speak with Dr. Wesley." "Wonderful." Chloe's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And I'll need to take your phone now. We can't have any distractions during the examination." "Actually, I'd prefer to keep it. My daughter might call." "Your daughter can call the front desk. We'll transfer her to Dr. Wesley's office." Chloe extended her hand. "The phone, Mrs. Patterson." I had two choices: resist and alert them to my suspicion, or comply and risk losing my evidence. "It's in my room," I said. "I'll get it after breakfast." Chloe's expression hardened. "I'll walk with you now. We don't want you to forget." She wheeled me back to my room, her grip on the wheelchair tighter than necessary. Once inside, she positioned herself between me and the door. "The phone?" I pulled it from my nightstand drawer where I'd hidden it under some books. Before handing it over, I managed to tap the emergency recording function, a feature that automatically uploaded everything to secure cloud storage. "Thank you." Chloe examined it, checking the recent calls and apps. "You've been recording things." My heart stopped. Had she found the files? "I use voice memos for my grocery lists," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Memory aids. You know how it is at my age." Chloe scrolled through the phone's interface. "There are quite a few recordings here. Hours of them. Like I said, memory aids, shopping lists, reminders to call Vanessa, medication schedules. We'll need to review these," Chloe said, "for your own safety." "Those are private," I objected. Chloe's smile was practiced, professional. "Mrs. Patterson, when you're under our care, we have a responsibility to ensure you're not doing anything that might harm yourself or others. Confused elderly patients sometimes record things they don't understand, then share them inappropriately. We're just protecting you. I want my phone back. After Dr. Wesley's examination, if everything checks out, you'll get it back. That was a lie. I knew they'd delete the recordings before returning the phone, but what Chloe didn't know was that every file was already backed up. The recordings, the financial documents, the photographs I'd taken of discrepancies in my medical chart, everything was stored securely beyond their reach. Fine, I said, affecting defeated resignation. Chloe's posture relaxed slightly. She thought she'd won. Now let's get you to Dr. Wesley's office. He's waiting. The cognitive examination was a joke. Standardized questions designed to identify dementia, administered in a way that made my correct answers seem uncertain. What year is it? Dr. Wesley asked, not looking up from his clipboard. 2024. Who is the current president? I answered correctly. He made notes that I couldn't see. Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? I did so without error. More notes. Mrs. Patterson, your nurse tells me you've been agitated lately, making accusations about the staff. I haven't made any accusations, I said calmly. I've simply been monitoring my own care, as is my right as a patient. Monitoring how? Dr. Wesley's eyes narrowed slightly. I've been tracking my medications, my therapy sessions, my treatment schedule. I spent my career as an attorney. Documentation is natural to me. An attorney. Dr. Wesley exchanged a glance with Chloe, who stood near the door. What kind of law did you practice? Elder law, specifically cases involving financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. The room went very quiet. I'd shown my hand deliberately. They needed to know I wasn't an easy target. I see. Dr. Wesley set down his clipboard. Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to be direct with you. Your behavior over the past few weeks has raised concerns among the staff. The recordings, the scrutiny of your bills, the questions about procedures. This isn't normal patient behavior. It's normal for a lawyer who notices discrepancies in her billing. What discrepancies? Warren Mitchell appeared in the doorway. I hadn't heard him approach. The facility administrator was a tall man in his 50s, always impeccably dressed. He smiled, but his eyes were calculating. Mrs. Patterson, Chloe tells me you're concerned about your billing. I've noticed charges for services I didn't receive, I said. Physical therapy sessions I never attended. Consultations with specialists who never visited. The total is substantial. Warren's smile never wavered. I'm sure there's a simple explanation. Medical billing is complex. Sometimes procedures are coded in ways that seem confusing to patients. I'm not confused, Mr. Mitchell. I'm concerned about fraud. The word hung in the air between us. Warren's smile finally faded. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Patterson. It's a serious problem, Mr. Mitchell, and I'm not the only resident affected. I've observed similar patterns with other patients. Have you? Warren moved closer, his presence suddenly intimidating. And what exactly have you observed? Enough to recognize a systematic scheme when I see one. Warren glanced at Dr. Wesley, then at Chloe. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Mrs. Patterson, I think we need to have a more thorough discussion about your mental state. Dr. Wesley, I'd like you to order a full psychiatric evaluation for Mrs. Patterson's own protection. That's not necessary, I said. I believe it is. You're making paranoid accusations, seeing patterns that don't exist, disturbing other residents with your theories. These are classic signs of declining cognitive function. Or classic signs of a lawyer recognizing fraud, I countered. Warren's expression hardened. You're in no position to make threats, Mrs. Patterson. You're a patient in our care. Your phone has been confiscated. Your family will be informed that you're experiencing confusion and paranoia. My family will ask questions, I said. Let them ask. We'll explain that you've been having difficulties. We'll show them Dr. Wesley's evaluation. We'll demonstrate our concern for your well-being. They'll understand that sometimes elderly patients experience these episodes. Warren thought he was cornering me. What he didn't know was that Stuart was already in motion. My former law partner would have contacted authorities by now. The evidence was secure, backed up beyond their reach. I want to speak with my daughter, I said. Of course. We'll arrange a call after you've had time to rest and we've adjusted your medications to help with the agitation. I don't need medication adjustments. Dr. Wesley will be the judge of that. Warren nodded to Chloe. Please escort Mrs. Patterson back to her room. We'll arrange for the psychiatric evaluation this afternoon. Chloe wheeled me out of Dr. Wesley's office. In the hallway, she leaned down close to my ear. "You should have kept quiet," she whispered. "Now things are going to get difficult." Back in my room, I was effectively isolated. No phone, no computer, no way to contact anyone. Outside the facility, my roommate had been moved to another room during my absence. A coincidence, Chloe explained. But I knew better. They were isolating me before I could tell anyone what I'd discovered. An hour later, a man in a white coat appeared at my door. "Mrs. Patterson? I'm Dr. Raymond Carver, psychiatrist. Mr. Mitchell asked me to evaluate you." The evaluation was more extensive than Dr. Wesley's questions. Dr. Carver asked about my career, my family, my reasons for noticing billing discrepancies. "You have quite an eye for detail," he noted. 4 decades of legal practice will do that," I replied. "And you believe the facility is defrauding you?" "I don't believe. I have evidence." "What evidence?" I'd prepared for this moment. "Documentation that's been secured with my attorney. Recordings, financial records, photographs, everything necessary to demonstrate a systematic pattern of billing fraud affecting multiple residents." Dr. Carver stopped writing. "You recorded staff conversations?" "I recorded my own medical care, as is my legal right in this state. Single-party consent for recordings." "That's quite thorough for someone who's supposedly confused." "I'm not confused, Dr. Carver. I'm elderly and recovering from surgery, but my mind is perfectly clear. Everything I've told you can be verified through independent investigation." Dr. Carver studied me for a long moment. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to be honest with you. I've worked with Riverside for 3 years. I've never seen evidence of the kind of fraud you're describing. But I also don't see evidence of cognitive impairment or paranoid delusions. You strike me as a sharp, observant woman who knows exactly what she's saying. Then you'll note that in your evaluation? I'll note that you don't meet criteria for involuntary psychiatric commitment or medication over objection. What you do with that information is your choice, but I won't be party to drugging someone who doesn't need it." He stood, preparing to leave. "Be careful, Mrs. Patterson. If you're right about this fraud, these people have a lot to lose." After Dr. Carver left, I sat in my wheelchair considering my options. The psychiatric evaluation would show I was competent, which would complicate Warren and Chloe's plans to discredit me. But without my phone, I couldn't contact Stuart or anyone else. The facility phone required staff assistance, and they'd monitor any calls I made. Then I remembered the emergency call button beside my bed. It was designed to alert staff to medical emergencies. But it also connected to an outside monitoring service, a requirement for licensed facilities. I pressed the button. Within seconds, a voice came through the speaker. "Riverside Senior Living, emergency response. What's your emergency?" "My name is Helen Patterson, room 247. I need to report suspected elder abuse and fraud at this facility. Please contact Stuart Hayes at Hayes & Patterson Law Firm immediately. Tell him Helen said the recordings are secure and to proceed with authorities." "Ma'am, this line is for medical emergencies only. This is an emergency. Residents are being exploited. I'm being held against my will. Please contact Stuart Hayes. He'll verify everything." The door burst open. Chloe, her face flushed with anger. "What are you doing?" "Reporting a crime," I said calmly. Behind her, Warren appeared, his composure finally cracking. "Disconnect that call," he ordered. Chloe reached for the emergency call button, but the voice on the speaker interrupted. "This conversation is being recorded as part of our emergency monitoring protocol. Any interference with emergency services will be reported to state licensing authorities. Patterson, help is on the way. Please stay on the line." Warren's face went pale. Emergency response calls were monitored and recorded by outside services beyond his control. Everything I just said was documented by an independent third party. "This is a misunderstanding," Warren said, composing himself. "Mrs. Patterson is confused. She's been having some difficulties with—" "I'm not confused," I interrupted. "I'm Helen Patterson, retired attorney. For the past 3 weeks, I've documented systematic billing fraud at this facility. The evidence has been secured with my law partner and is currently being reviewed by federal authorities. This facility has been defrauding Medicare and private insurance companies by billing for services never rendered." "That's absurd," Warren tried. but the emergency operator interrupted. "Sir, are you the facility administrator?" "Yes, Warren Mitchell." "Please be advised that State Adult Protective Services and local law enforcement have been contacted. They're en route to your facility now. Do not attempt to interfere with the resident or remove any documentation." Warren's composure shattered completely. He looked at Chloe, then at me. "You've made a terrible mistake." "The only mistake was yours," I replied. "You assumed I was just another confused old woman you could exploit. You forgot to check my background before targeting me." Through the window, I could see cars pulling into the parking lot, police cruisers and unmarked vehicles, Stuart's sedan among them. Warren turned to leave, but Chloe grabbed his arm. "What do we do?" "We." Warren shook his head. "This was your idea. You approached me with the billing scheme." Chloe's face went white. "You said it was foolproof. You said—" "I said nothing that can be proven," Warren interrupted. "But I'm sure Mrs. Patterson's recordings will be very interesting for investigators to hear." Stuart appeared at my door, flanked by a state investigator and 2 police officers. "Helen, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Stuart, though I'd like my phone back." Chloe still had it, clutched in her hand. The state investigator, a woman named Alice Brenner, extended her hand. "Mrs. Patterson? I'm with the state's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. We've been reviewing the evidence your partner provided. We'd like to ask you some questions." "I'm happy to cooperate. Everything you need is in my phone's cloud storage. 3 weeks of recordings, documented billing discrepancies, photographs of altered medical records." Alice Brenner looked at Warren. "Mr. Mitchell, you and your staff need to preserve all records immediately. Any attempt to destroy evidence will result in additional charges." "Mrs. Patterson, can you identify other residents who may have been affected?" I provided names and room numbers. 6 residents I'd identified through observation and overheard conversations. Alice dispatched officers to check on each of them. Warren and Chloe were separated and questioned individually. Within hours, the scope of the fraud became clear. The investigation moved quickly. Forensic accountants reviewed Riverside's billing records going back 3 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Residents with cognitive impairments were systematically targeted. Services were billed but never provided. Medications were adjusted to keep patients compliant. Family communications were monitored and sometimes intercepted. The total fraud exceeded $2 million. Warren and Chloe weren't working alone. Dr. Wesley had provided medical justification for unnecessary procedures. The billing manager had processed the fraudulent claims. Even some of the therapy staff had participated, signing off on sessions that never occurred. 17 staff members were eventually implicated. I was moved to a different facility to complete my recovery, one Stuart personally vetted. The other affected residents were also relocated and their cases reviewed. Several families who'd paid out of pocket for fraudulent services began filing civil suits. The criminal charges came first. Warren Mitchell was charged with healthcare fraud, theft from government programs, and elderly exploitation. Chloe Brennan faced similar charges, plus intimidation of a witness. Dr. Wesley lost his medical license before the criminal trial even began. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 days, walking the jury through my documentation process and the evidence I'd gathered. The recordings were particularly damaging. Conversations between Warren and Chloe discussing which residents were good targets. Dr. Wesley approving medication changes specifically to keep patients compliant. Staff members joking about billing for services they never provided. The defense tried to discredit me, my age, my recovery from surgery, the complexity of medical billing. But I'd spent 40 years in courtrooms. I knew how to testify. When the defense attorney suggested I was confused about what I'd observed, I calmly walked him through specific dates, times, and conversations, all documented in my recordings. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, exasperated, "isn't it possible you misunderstood these conversations? That what you perceived as fraud was actually standard medical practice?" "Counselor," I replied, "I've prosecuted healthcare fraud cases for 2 decades. I know the difference between a coding error and a systematic scheme to defraud government programs. What I documented at Riverside wasn't confusion, it was crime." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Warren Mitchell was convicted on all counts. Chloe Brennan was convicted on all but one. Dr. Wesley, who'd taken a plea deal to testify against the others, received a reduced sentence but would never practice medicine again. Warren received 12 years in federal prison. Chloe got 8 years. The others who participated received sentences ranging from probation to 5 years, depending on their involvement. The civil suits brought by affected families settled for undisclosed amounts. Riverside Senior Living's license was revoked. The facility closed 6 months after the criminal trial ended. I completed my recovery at a facility where I was treated with respect and provided actual, honest care. My daughter Vanessa flew in for the trial and stayed for 2 weeks afterward. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't visit more during your recovery," she said one evening. "If I'd known what was happening." "You couldn't have known. They were very good at hiding it. That's what made them dangerous. But you figured it out." I recognized the warning signs from my work, and I remembered the most important lesson from 4 decades of elder law practice. "What lesson?" Vanessa asked. "That being elderly doesn't mean being helpless. That age is irrelevant if your mind is sharp and your determination is strong, and that sometimes the best defense against exploitation is simply paying attention." The case drew significant media attention. Elder rights organizations invited me to speak about recognizing financial exploitation. Law schools asked me to lecture on healthcare fraud. I even wrote an article for a legal journal about documentation techniques for vulnerable adults who suspect abuse. 6 months after the trial, Stuart contacted me about an interesting opportunity. "Helen, how would you feel about consulting work? We're seeing an increase in elder exploitation cases. Your expertise would be valuable, and you could work your own hours. Take only cases you find interesting." I'd been bored in retirement anyway. "What kind of consulting?" "Training adult protective services investigators, reviewing cases for warning signs, maybe some expert witness testimony when cases go to trial." "I'm 79 years old, Stuart, and sharper than attorneys half your age. The question isn't whether you can do it, it's whether you want to." I returned to work part-time, focusing on the most complex exploitation cases, the ones where vulnerable adults were being systematically targeted by people who thought they were easy prey. The work was fulfilling in a way retirement never had been. I wasn't building a practice or chasing billable hours. I was using 5 decades of experience to protect people who needed someone who understood how these schemes worked. Chloe Brennan wrote to me from prison once, a rambling letter full of justifications and excuses. She'd been underpaid, overworked, dealing with her own financial pressures. Warren had pressured her into the scheme. She'd never meant to hurt anyone. I wrote one line in response. "You targeted vulnerable people because you thought they couldn't fight back. That wasn't financial pressure. That was cruelty." 1 year after the trial, I attended a ceremony where the state's attorney general presented awards to people who'd significantly contributed to elder protection efforts. I received recognition for my work exposing the Riverside fraud. During my acceptance speech, I looked out at an audience filled with adult protective services workers, law enforcement, healthcare regulators, and attorneys. Chloe Brennan and Warren Mitchell thought I was a confused old woman they could exploit, I said. They took my phone, isolated me, and tried to discredit my observations. What they didn't know was that my phone was recording. What they didn't understand was that being elderly doesn't mean being powerless. It just means having the patience and experience to document everything before striking back. They underestimated me because of my age. That was their fatal mistake. Age taught me to be thorough. Experience taught me to be patient. And 4 decades of law practice taught me exactly how to build a case that would bring them down. The recordings they tried to confiscate became the evidence that convicted them. They thought they'd silenced me by taking my phone. Instead, they'd just proven they had something to hide.